Kia ora everyone and welcome for greeting and meeting with us here this afternoon and this evening. First want to acknowledge the people of this area, Ngāti Katununu, and significant land masses that we have and areas of significance. My name is Samantha, I am from Hastings, I now live in Ahuriri and I work for Circularity. Circularity are a circular innovation and design business, and we're brought together by our shared mahi in the circular economy. And a whakatuki that guides our work is those who lead give light to those who follow, and those who follow give light to those who lead. And when it comes to these topics, we know that we are all teachers, but we are also all learners. And it's that sort of perspective that we bring and that I bring here today. I feel honoured to be here amongst all of you in something that we're also passionate about, which is how do we start to regenerate and circulate materials and resources in our environment. For me, my kind of journey into this space, growing up in Hawke's Bay, I was lucky enough to grow up and spend a lot of time with my grandmother. And she was sort of the homemaker. She has a beautiful garden, which she still has. She moved thousands of plants from one house to another a couple of years ago, and you'll know her house if you ever go to the Mahora subdivision because it just is so bright with all the flowers. But something that she said to me a lot was when I was growing up, we were going through this phase where we sort of had the low maintenance garden, which was, you know, the hedges, and we sort of be done with flowers in our gardens. And it really hurt her to see that, just because knowing the impact that has on bees and biodiversity and birds, and that's something that sort of stuck with me in my journey and led me into the wonder of plants and studying plants and our ecosystems, and was lucky enough to start to learn about how our environment works and how all of the different earth systems are connected through water and atmosphere. And as I learnt that, and I learnt more about how plants grow and their forests are this completely circular system and how there is no waste in nature, I became really inspired by that, and the fact that in a forest there literally is no waste. Everything that decomposes becomes food for something else. And so now when I look at our cities, I just find it quite hard personally to reconcile how we go from that to the cities that we now live in, and where does all this stuff come from is my constant question. Where does all these materials come from, and how do we design them in such a way that they look so radically different to what we see in our more natural environments? And so what we call that system now is the linear economy, and we've sort of started to figure out what that means. And what that means is now in our economies we take something, we make something, we use it, and then we dispose it, and that whole system completely goes against sort of how nature has managed resources previously. And we're seeing that impact and all these challenges that Zeb just talked through, where different parts of our ecosystems are going out of balance. And so when we were talking with Zeb about how we might help open this weekend, what we wanted to do was just share a bit about how we might start to look at what a new economy could look like. What are the key challenges that we face in our current food economy, and how might it look in the future? So at the moment we know that just 4 crops provide 60% of the calories globally. Huge loss of biodiversity. We know that our food system contributes 10 billion tonnes of CO2 to the atmosphere, contributes about 1/3. How did we design a food system that, rather than taking in carbon, produces carbon? And we know that 1/3 of food that's produced is wasted. So all of these challenges sort of, again, come back to that linear system. So the circular economy is sort of a new way of looking at how might we develop our financial system in the way that we think of value and materials moving through our economies, and that's through a circular methodology. So it's about working with nature, not against it, and preventing the harmful materials that we see that cause problems from entering our economy in the first place. We like to think of this as mining from our economy rather than mining from our environment. So a circular economy only works when we start mining value out of the economy rather than mining resources out of our environment. And so the circular economy, if you could kind of think about the definition of that for a moment, is really about an industrial system that now becomes restorative or regenerative by design and intention. So about 80% of the environmental impact of services and products is determined at the design stage. And you can kind of see that, and you look at your phone, a lot of the environmental impact is all because of how it was designed. It was designed to be used and then thrown out. It wasn't designed to be restored, to be repaired, to be have a long life, any of those things. It's about how we design it. So in a circular economy, we replace that end-of-life concept that no longer exists. It's about what form of recovery is that technical or biological material going to go into. All energy is obviously sourced from renewable sources because, again, we need energy to be able to continue to replenish itself. And we stop things from coming into our system that nature can't recognise, so we have to eliminate toxic materials. A circular food system is the same thing. It embodies the principles of a circular economy, eliminating waste and pollution, keeping materials in flow and a high value, and regenerating our living systems. So rather than bending nature to produce food, we design food in a way that allows nature to thrive. So just quickly-ish, I'm going to just sort of paint a picture about how we might start to look at our food system through a circular economy lens. And there's kind of three key outcomes. The food system globally, we saw where it's heading, is a food system that is diverse, that is distributive, and is regenerative. So when we look at diversity, it's about imagining a food system that shifts from nature negative to nature positive. So the resilience is created from its diversity, and we change the world by changing what's on our plates. So growing and utilising diverse ingredients that come from a broader range of plants and animals, rather than just 4 crops providing 60% of our calories. We make full use of the diversity that we have around us. So we know, for example, that there are 4,500 varieties of potatoes, and yet when you go into a supermarket, you maybe see 3. We know that we could increase the genetic diversity of crops and livestock, and therefore build a more resilient food system. Looking at how do we get sweetness into our food rather than being reliant on sugar cane. What would it look like if we were to utilise foods like sugar beet, coconut, carob, date palm, monk fruit, stevia. There's a whole range of foods that could provide sweetener, but we cease to use them. And this movement is happening globally. There's brands like Knorr, who are owned by Unilever, who have just announced this in recent years, the World Eat for Good Day. And what they're doing is trying to encourage people to create demand for alternative foods. So rather than making all of your grains rice, swapping in for quinoa. Rather than being reliant on just potatoes, you're introducing different varieties of sweet potatoes. Rather than being reliant on animal protein, you're sourcing lots of different types of protein. And what that does is allows people, by choosing more diversity on their plates, to shift the environmental impact of what they're eating. So quinoa provides more protein than rice, in lots of contexts, at half the greenhouse gas emissions. Lentils, again, allow you to have more diversity, reducing emissions of your total protein source. Sweet potatoes, 3 times more calcium, so better impact for you, and can often create greater biodiversity on that farm. There are other opportunities as well for food producers to help with making foods that have got these different varieties. For example, moving from pea flour from just wheat flour. And so we're starting to see this in more diverse and innovative food products, but the opportunity starts with us and what we put on our plate and then what we're asked to have on our plate. We can also create a food system that, if you want to go in a different direction, is more distributive. So a food system that is focused on delivering nutrients. It's about shifting what we're asking for. Rather than just food and calories, we're looking for nutrients and making sure that food never creates waste. So if we're starting to think in this way about focusing on nutrients and not creating waste, it allows us to utilise technology to grow in new locations. And to start to redefine what it means to grow food. We're seeing this with the Food Agriculture Organisation of the United Nations, supporting governments to introduce agroecology into different contexts, starting to bring it closer into cities like In Milan and Sao Paulo, they are training different communities in how to introduce agroecology into a city fringe so that they can connect local people with how their food is produced, starting to lean into what Zeb just painted the picture for. It also helps us to create positive outcomes for nature if we can sort of think a bit more creatively about where we might utilise space to grow different types of foods. So there are a lot of crops that we're starting to see now that don't travel well over long distances. So how can we utilise technology like they are with Sky Foods and vertical farms in areas where they're able to grow crops that are suited to that, capture water all year round and grow in new locations. And then we're also looking towards ways that we can increase our resilience of our food system by providing surplus and edible food that is was not able to be used in its whole form into the upcycled food movement. And so globally this is growing really quickly. It's increasing in annual growth by 5%, which is about $46 billion just in making foods and products out of surplus food. So you can imagine lettuces, cabbages, there's a lot of stuff that kind of sits around the edges. A lot of those sweeteners that we don't utilise, how might we utilise them in producing the foods that we see and we typically rely on a few foods for, like biscuits. Biscuits are a great one to imagine what happened if we were using excess oat flour and different types of sweetener rather than just flour and water and sugar like we do at the moment. All of this relies on new partnerships, new connections, and creative thinking between different groups to form foods that people value. And then thirdly, it's about creating a regenerative food system, which I think often we're all connected by that concept already. So a food system that builds natural capital and allows nature to thrive. Globally, we're seeing the movement for that, and then here in New Zealand we are too. And a lot of this comes down to the recognition that soil is responsible for 90% of the food that we eat. So damaging it puts our own health at risk. So growing food in a way that creates positive outcomes for nature is really what we're connected by here. Allowing healthier soil, healthier water, and replacing toxic chemicals that nature can't recognise is a huge part of this, ensuring that these materials continue to be cycled through the system. We're seeing that in a lot of the solutions that we're talking about here today, looking to what the role of seaweed might be, how we might combine food waste with larvae to create new forms of nutrients and fertilisers. But also creating a new role for farmers. And again, we've heard about this already, where it's more about moving into a role as being a steward of the land with multiple forms of value that you're able to create in more of a mixed methodology. We'd love to see a more diverse, distributive and regenerative food system here in Aotearoa. And we know that by connecting these things together, we can enhance our impact and shift the food system again from being one that bends nature to produce food, but is actually designed for nature to thrive. Where we're working with nature, not against it, and putting the circular principles to work in our most important system, which is food. So over the next couple of days, what we'd love to think about is how the solutions that you're seeing and you're hearing and you're discussing fit into each of these three categories. And what we'd love to bring together on Sunday in our session is what are some of the barriers to these solutions becoming part of that circular economy that we see being shaped, and how might we come together to help scale these solutions and connect them between the different groups. Because a lot of them are really reliant on new partnerships, new knowledge sharing, and how do we do this at a more rapid speed and scale so that we can tackle the challenges we see ahead of us. So I hope that provides a little bit of kind of context about where this could head, and even just the categorization, I think, of what this could look like so that we can start to weave together some newer, bolder outcomes for all of us. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.